The Center of the Cyclone, an autobiography of inner space by John C. Lilly. And this is the second part of chapter 3. During this first trip, I also defined other kinds of belief with which I would experiment. I would try to go to universes other than our consensus universe, universes I didn't necessarily believe existed, but which I could imagine. At first, this was a test of the hypothesis that what one believes to be true becomes true. Before the trip, I didn't believe in these universes or spaces, but I defined them as existing. During the LSD trip in the tank, I then took on these beliefs as true. After the trip, I then disengaged and looked at what had happened as a set of experiences, a set of consequences of the belief. For example, I assumed that there were civilizations way beyond our own, that there were entities in our universe that we normally cannot detect, but are there and have realities way beyond ours. Suddenly, I was precipitated into such spaces. I maintained myself as a central point of consciousness, of feeling, of recording. I moved into universes containing beings much larger than myself, so that I was a mote in their sunbeam, a small ant in their universe, a single thought in a huge mind, or a small program in a cosmic computer. The first time I entered these spaces, I was swept, pushed, carried, whirled, and in general beat around by the processes which I could not understand, processes of immense energy, of fantastic light, and of terrifying power. My very being itself was threatened as I was pushed through these vast spaces by these vast entities. Waves of the equivalent of light, of sound, of motion, of intense emotion were carried in dimensions beyond my understanding. The first time this happened, I became extremely anxious and jumped back into my body. Then I became intensely exhilarated and went into a high while in my body. I got out of the tank and went out into the sunlight, looking up into the sky, savoring the fact that I was a human on a planet. For the first time since childhood, life was precious. The sun, the sea, the air, all were precious. My body was precious. My feelings of energy and of extreme exhilaration continued. I sat and contemplated the wonder of our creation, of the creation of our planet. An hour or so later, I climbed back into the tank and launched into other regions. I had had enough of the vast spaces and the vast entities for a while. Now I attempted to contact other systems of life, more on a level with our own, and yet alien to us. I moved into a region of strange life forms, neither above nor below the human level, but strange beings of strange shapes, metabolism, thought forms, and so forth. These beings reminded me of some of the dawnings I had seen of Tibetan gods, of the drawings I had seen of Tibetan gods and goddesses, of ancient Greek portrayals of their gods, and of some of the bug-eyed monsters of science fiction. Some of these forms were constructed of liquid, some were constructed of glowing gases, some were solid-state organisms. The vast variety of possible life forms in the universe passed before me. In this particular space, they were not involved with me. I was not involved with them. I was an observer watching them. They were apparently unaware of me and were going about their particular businesses without interfering with me or paying any attention to me. I was an observing point in their universe. uninvolved, merely there, picking up what I could of their way of life and recording it somehow. I came back to my body from that experience with full respect for the possible varieties of life forms that can exist in the universe. I was awestruck by the varieties of creation, by the varieties of intelligences that exist in our universe. My next trip was down into my own body, looking at various systems of organs, cellular assemblages, and structure. I traveled among cells, watching their functioning, and realized that within myself was a grand assemblage of living organisms, all of which added up to me. I traveled through my brain, watching the neurons and their activities. I traveled through my heart, watching the pulsations of the muscle systems. I traveled through the blood, watching the business of the white blood corpuscles. I traveled down through my gut tract, getting acquainted with the bacteria and the mucosal cells in the walls. I went into my testes and became acquainted with the formation of sperm cells. I then quickly moved into smaller and smaller dimensions, down to the quantum levels, and watched the play of atoms in their own vast universes, their wide, empty spaces, with the fantastic forces involved in each of the distant nuclei, with their orbital clouds of force field electrons and the primary particles coming to this system from outer spaces. It was really frightening to see tunneling effects and the other phenomena of the quantum level taking place. I came back from that trip realizing what a lot of empty space I had in myself and what vast energies were locked in the matter of my own body. Having seen nuclei disintegrate before my eyes, releasing fantastic radiation energies on a microscopic scale, I had a new respect for what I was carrying around and what I, in a sense, was at these levels of reasoning and functioning. I then left the tank again and went into the bathroom. My belly felt full and distended, as if I were pregnant. I became my own mother, pregnant, carrying me, myself in my own belly. I suddenly realized that I was about to give birth to myself. I sat on the toilet and had a huge bowel movement, which was myself. Suddenly, the humor of this peculiar division of myself, giving birth to myself, struck me. I had an ecstatic experience of total sexuality, of being a man and a woman totally fused, giving birth as a baby dropped into the toilet. I realized that it was not me, not a baby, and yet at the same time, I lived through giving birth to myself, as if I were my mother. I experienced my birth as she had experienced it, as a totally exhilarating event, giving rise to a new living entity. I went back into the tank and went off into other spaces far from this planet. Later, I was to notice that there was a definite rhythm to leaving my body, to coming back and finding out something new about my body from a new perspective in the far out spaces. This back and forth between the far out and the very close in was a rhythm I seemed to have come across, almost as a natural discovery. This seemed to be my tendency, to move as far out as possible and then to move as far in as possible. I gradually learned that the goal was to do neither, but just to stay in as close as possible and be as far out as possible simultaneously. Over the years, I have gradually gone from an either or to a both in regard to these spaces. I am far out and close in simultaneously. After the first few experiments in the tank, things began to shape up in far better fashion. My role as an explorer became much clearer. I was cleaning up a lot of materials that were hindering me. I discovered that I had to clean up my hindrances to imagining or metaprogramming anything and everything. All and everything that one can imagine exists. Literally, one is tuned into the cosmos with all the infinite variations. Once I had arrived at this basic belief, the possibility of tuning in on any one of the infinite varieties of the universe, I went on a high, became extremely exhilarated, and launched further into the explorations. Before my second tank trip, I suddenly was thrown a fantastic hindrance. I had a migraine attack, the first one in 9 months since my first 2 LSD trips. Allow me to review what a migraine attack meant to me. I had an excruciating pain in the right side of my head, which lasted 8 hours. I had been having these attacks about once every 18 days for the past 40 years. My thinking was very much simplified during these attacks to the point where I was an oversimplified human being. During the period in which the migraine pain was me, I could not think effectively and broadly. I could not function and had to lie down in a darkened room. This was the original negative stimulus for taking LSD. I wanted to get rid of my migraine, to solve it, to never have another attack. I temporarily abandoned the tank and tried a trip lying down on the bed to examine my migraine. The facts I had learned in 3 years of training analysis about my migraine paraded before me in a very graphic form. First, a space appeared in which the neurological lesion theory of migraine attacks was epitomized. There is a very large red neuron, which is the cause of the migraine. It is a pain neuron that can start firing and maintain its firing for 8 hours. There are yellow dendritic ends. There are yellow dendritic endings on this neuron, yellow axons going off to the cortex from this location in the mesencephalon, mesencephalon. These are excitatory yellow neurons. There is another set of dendrites ending in this neuron which are blue. These are the control endings that prevent the red neuron from firing. These 2, yellow and blue, go into the cerebral cortex. However, each of these sets has connections into other parts of the brain not under the control of the cortex, into the hippocampal region and into the archaeocortex, where basic animal survival programs are stored. These can activate the migraine when I am overexcited. I lay there and I traced all these circuits, all of the programs that I had conceived could cause the migraine and other programs that could terminate an attack. I spent some time in going through this theoretical structure for the explanation of the migraine. I then put that aside and went into another space having to do with the migraine. At this time, the side of my head where the pain occurred developed a hole, H-O-L-E. This hole was on an interface between our universe and another one that contained alien demonic forms who were pouring into my head from their universe. I shrieked in terror as they approached and entered my head. During the LSD trip, I had a horribly real migraine attack. While I was under attack from these demons, I went into a terror panic space, suddenly realized where I was, and came out and terminated the whole experience by closing off the hole from that universe. I then went through a long sequence in which God, out there, had given me migraine as a warning against overdoing things, as a warning of excess beyond wisdom as a punishment for committing sin. All of this then became hooked up to my sexuality, and I went through a long sequence having to do with punishment for not attaining spiritual enlightenment and for having gone into the animal world of sexual intercourse. This quickly reminded me of the initial LSD trips in which I had protected the goddess and the female gorilla. Let me read that again. This quickly reminded me of the initial LSD trip in which I had projected the goddess and the female gorilla onto the body of my guide. I was then able to see the irrationality of these past programs. I realized that they were still active, that I would not be able to erase them, but that I could allow for their existence. The right side of my head became filled with joy, exhilaration, and new feeling. Temporarily freed from this old hindrance, I was then able to go back into the tank experiments, armed with my new knowledge of how to pilot and navigate in these difficult spaces. I then launched a series of 8 experiments having to do with suprahuman, supra-self kinds of spaces. One of my major aims here was to get back to the place with the 2 guides that I had been in during the coma in the hospital when I was close to death. I had been forced into an extremely anxiety-filled space with lots of pain in my head. The aim this time was to see if I could get into the same space without this threat of death hanging over me. Each of the previous times when I had met the 2 guides, I had been in a state of fear of the loss of life. Somehow, the knowledge that the guides had given me in this last foray into their region armed me with the loss of the fear of death. Their assurance that I could come back to their regions any time that I needed to, and their assurance that my time had not yet arrived for my leaving my body permanently, gave me the strength and the courage to try this experiment. All of the previous experiments had been done with 100 micrograms of pure lysergic acid diethylamide tartrate, in brackets, Sandoz, S-A-N-D-O-Z. For this experiment, I decided to use a higher dose. I started with 100 milligrams, waited an hour, and took another 100. And then, in another hour, took another 100, for a total dose of 300 milligrams. I based the increased dosage on the literature. The 300 milligrams had been used to induce deep religious experiences in alcoholics. I chose the divided dose schedule rather than one dose so that I could maintain my piloting and navigation skills and storage capacity. I wanted to be in control of my movement out of the body. During the first hour, I worked on the prime directive program of relaxing my body, letting it take over its vital functions. After the second dose, I went to the 0 point of infinite darkness and infinite silence. By the end of the 3rd hour, with the 3rd dose, I was ready to try to get into the space of the 2 guides. Previously, I had tried to figure out how to get into that space without the fear and the pain. Somehow or other, they had transmitted to me that I could return any time that I wanted to return. Therefore, all I had to do was relax completely and define this space to be the space where I was going. Having been there previously, it turned out that this was the proper procedure. I defined myself in their space, and suddenly I was there in their space. I became a bright, luminous point of consciousness, radiating light, warmth, and knowledge. I moved into a space of astonishing brightness, a space filled with golden light, with warmth, and with knowledge. I sat in this space, without a body, but with all of myself there, centered. I felt fantastically exhilarated, with a great sense of awe and wonder and reverence. The energy surrounding me was of an incalculably high intensity, but I found that I could stand it this time. I could see, feel, and know out in the great vastness of empty space filled with light. Slowly but surely, the two guides began to come forward toward me from the vast distance. At first, I was barely able to detect them in the background of high-intensity light. This time, they approached very slowly. As they approached, their presences became more and more powerful, and I noticed that more and more of them was coming into me. Their thinking, their feeling, their knowledge was pouring into me. As they approached, I could share their thinking, their knowledge, and their feeling at an incredibly high rate of speed. This time, they were able to approach closer before I began to get the feelings of being overwhelmed by their presence. They stopped just as it was becoming almost intolerable to have them any closer. As they stopped, they communicated in effect. We will not approach any closer, as this seems to be your limit for closeness with us at this time. You have progressed since we were last together. As we told you, you can come back any time once you learn the roots. We are sent to instruct you. You now have X number of years left to inhabit the body that you are given. If you wish to stay here now, you may. However, the discovery of your body in the laboratory tank in the Virgin Islands will leave a mess back there for others to clean up. If you go back into your body, it will mean a struggle and large amounts of work in order to get through hindrances that you carry with you. You still have some evasions to explore before you can progress to the level at which you are existing at this moment. You can come and permanently be in this state. However, it is advisable that you achieve this through your own efforts while still in the body, so that you can exist both here and in the body simultaneously. Your trips out here are evasions of your trip on the planet when looked at in one way. When looked at another way, you are learning, and your ability to come here shows that you have progressed far along this path. Now that you have made it without a plan and without fear, without pain, Now that you have made it without pain and without fear, you have made progress. Your next assignment, if you wish it, is to achieve this through your own efforts, plus the help of others. So far, you've been doing your experiments alone, in solitude, and you have learned some of the ways here. Your next assignment is to contact others, like yourself, who have these capacities, help them, and learn from them how to carry out this kind of existence. There are several others on your planet capable of teaching you and also of learning from you. There are levels beyond where you are now, where we exist, to which you can go with the proper work. Thus, as part of your assignment, you are to perfect your means while staying in the body of communicating with this region, with this space, with us. There are other methods than LSD, plus solitude for achieving these results. There are other means than fright and pain. They gave me a very large amount of additional information, but on this information they placed a seal. They said that I would forget it when I came back into the body until such time as this information was needed. Then it would be there, and I would use it, remembering what they had put into me. I came back from this trip totally exhilarated, feeling extremely confident, and knowing exactly what I had to do. But there was a quality of sadness about the return, a bit of grief that I was not yet ready to stay in that region. I spent 5 days working through what they had told me. I found that the future plan for my life was unfolding quite automatically. I was to finish the work with the dolphins and get on to work with humans. I was to get through some more of my hindrances and to find out more of my evasions to getting on with the mission. I then went on to do other experiments with LSD in the tank, penetrating through many of my hindrances and discovering more of my evasions. During these experiments, I felt some sort of unseen guidance as to what to do next. I began to feel the presence of the guides without going to their spaces. In each new universe that I penetrated, I felt their presence protecting me from the huge entities that inhabit these other spaces. In the last of this series of experiments, I was shown the whole universe as we know it. I am out beyond your galaxy, beyond galaxies as we know them. Time is apparently speeded up to 100 billion times. The whole universe collapses into a point. There is a tremendous explosion, and out of this point, on one side comes positive matter and positive energies, streaking into the cosmos at fantastic velocities. Out of the opposite side of the point comes antimatter streaking off into the opposite direction. The universe expands to its maximum extent, recollapses, and expands 3 times. During each expansions, the guides say, man appears here and disappears there. All I can see is a thin slice for man. I ask, where does man go when he disappears until he is ready to reappear again? They say, that is us. During this experience, I was filled with awe, reverence, and a fantastic feeling of smallness, of not amounting to very much. Everything was happening on such a vast scale that I was merely an observer of microcosmic size, and yet I was more than this. I was part of some vast network of similar beings, all connected. Somehow, I was given an individuality for temporary purposes only. I would be reabsorbed into the network when the time came. After this experiment, word came that LSD was no longer to be used, and each of the investigators was to send his supply back to Sandoz. New laws came into effect making it illegal to use LSD anymore except under strictly limited conditions. Now I could understand why people were frightened of LSD. Now I could understand why it seemed necessary to stop the legal use of LSD. My interpretations of the above experiences varied depending on my real situation on this planet. There were times when I denied these experiences, denied them any validity other than my own imagination. There were other times when I felt that they had a very secure reality, and I had a feeling of certitude about their validity. The 2 guides warned me that I would go through such phases of skepticism, of doubt. One thing that does stick with me is the feeling of reality that was there during the experiences. I knew that this was the truth. At other times, I have not been so sure. Apparently, I'm in a position of waiting and seeing. Meanwhile, I have tried other approaches to get into these same spaces, not using LSD in the tank, but other methods such as hypnosis and group efforts. These are discussed in another part of the book. And this concludes chapter 3. And I hope you're enjoying this. I've read this book before. I was really influenced by it, really astounded and amazed by it. So I'm rereading it here, and again I'm finding it just fascinating. So I hope you stick with it, and please like and subscribe, and till soon.